Hey guys, it's Emily. Let's make a baby blanket.
Okay guys, we are making a hand knit chunky baby blanket. So what you're going to need today are 2 skeins of yarn. Any pair of scissors will do. And your hands. Very super beginner tutorial. The yarn I am using specifically, this rainbow pattern, is from Hobby Lobby. It's the Baby Bee Cuddly One yarn, and the color is called Fruit Flavored. Each of these skeins is 33 yards. With the other Hobby Lobby brand of the extra chunky yarn, it's 28 yards. So this will make a slightly longer blanket. On the back of your skein of yarn, there's this little information box here. You do want to check that to see. You want to make sure your yarn says size 7 jumbo. And then it also has the washing instructions here. All right, let's get started. We're going to take the label off and find the end of your yarn. So mine is tucked in right there. I'm just going to pull it out, and there it is. I'm going to scoot my other yarn to the side, and let's get started. So first thing you want to do is tie a knot on the end of your yarn. And this is going to keep it from unraveling. So make that knot tight and cut your yarn tail. Alright, and with this yarn, like I explained in my adult throw tutorial, it does kind of leave some fuzzies behind after you cut it, but just scoot those to the side. Alright, first thing you want to do is make a slip knot. So to do that, just make this shape right here. You're going to take the working yarn. The yarn attached to the skein is always called the working yarn. You're going to take that and turn it over on your yarn. So what you're left with is this nice ribbon shape. You're going to take your fingers, I'm using my left hand to reach inside that loop, and I'm going to grab a hold of the working yarn. Then with my right hand, I'm taking both of these strings here, keeping the yarn on my other hand and just pulling tight. And this is what you should have. So I'm going to make this loop a little bit smaller to start. So to do that, I'm going to hold on to the knot, and I'm pulling on the working yarn that's still attached to my skein until I'm at the loop size that I want, roughly about 2 inches. And for this baby blanket, I am going to, I almost said crochet. I am going to hand knit this a little bit looser than my other blankets I've done to just show you guys what that looks like. So first thing I'm going to do is stick my left hand in, my 2 fingers, and I'm going to pull the working yarn through. So now I have 2 loops. We want to make 14 loops for this baby blanket. So now I'm switching to my right hand. I am right-handed. And I'm reaching my fingers through that circle there, that loop that's left, and pulling that yarn through to make another loop. That's 3, reaching through and pulling up. That's 4, reaching through, 5, 6. Gonna let some of my yarn loose here. reaching through there. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, reaching in there, pulling up, 14. And this is what I have here. If you ever get lost while you're making this and need to just recount, all you're going to do is count the loops. So this one here counts as 1, that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. So your stitch is going to have a top and a bottom. And I just counted the top loops to make sure I had 14. So roughly, this is about how wide your blanket is going to turn out. Right along, we're going to take this chain that we just made, or cast on, whatever you want to call it. You're going to grab it with both hands and turn it over. So now you're looking at the back. And to make our second row, stick with it, guys. This is the most confusing part, and the blanket only gets easier and more fun after this. So to go into our second row, we're going to be pulling up into the loops that are in the middle of the stitch, the back bump of these stitches. So when you look at this, there's always going to be a top loop, a bottom loop, and a loop in the middle. We are going into the loops that are in the middle. Okay, so taking our working yarn here, it's sticking out of the top right now. We want to put that underneath. So we're going to take it, make it go down like this, and tucking it underneath. That way when we go into our first loop, it just looks a lot better. This first loop here that's hanging out to the side, we're going to skip this loop. So we're going to leave it to the side. The beginning of every row, we'll be skipping the first loop. It's always going to hang to the side there. This is my first bump that I'm going to go into. So I'm going to reach my fingers in, grab that yarn, and pull up a loop. And this first row is going to look kind of strange because the loops are all going to be going straight up. Now, there's my second bump right there. I'm going to reach in and pull up. There's my next loop right here. Top, bottom, there's the back bump, middle there, and pulling up on that. There's the next, pulling up, and all the way down this row. There's the back bump right there. I have been getting a lot of emails from you guys with your finished blankets, and I'm so happy to see all the blankets you guys are making. So, if you are inspired by any of my tutorials, I would love to see your finished work. Eventually, I am going to make a YouTube compilation video of all of your guys' finished blankets because I just think it's amazing. We're all making blankets together. These make amazing gifts. There's nothing like a homemade blanket. All right, there's my middle right there. Gonna pull up. I'm at the end of my row here. I have one more bump to go into. Let's see, because there's my slip knot. I'm going to go right here, pull up, and we're going to count our loops to make sure we still have 14. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and that first loop we skipped makes 14. Okay, so this is what our work looks like so far. Here's what the bottom looks like. This is going to be the bottom edge of your blanket. Looking really nice. So we're going to move on to our third row. We're now going to continue knitting this direction, then this direction, and so on until the blanket's finished. I like to do this on a table. I can just kind of have my work right in front of me, see exactly what's going on. Okay. First stitch right here, that was the last stitch in our previous row. We're going to leave that to the side. We're going to skip that stitch. And we're going to go into the second one. So skipping that stitch, see, I have a rainbow blanket already done here, makes the side edge of your blanket look like, it turns the stitch sideways basically. So there's like the bottom edge and then the side. It just makes for a really nice finished look on your blanket. So we're skipping the first one, pulling up into the second one. And like I said, I typically hand knit these kind of tight. I am going to make sure I do a looser blanket to show you guys how it turns out. So reaching in and pulling up in all of our loops. Reaching in here, pulling up, reach your fingers in and pull up. Reach in, pull up. These baby blankets work up so quick. Makes an awesome gift. Okay, last loop of this row. We skipped it when we started this row. It hung out to the side here. Now you're going to pick that loop up. So reach in and pull up. Now we're done with this row. I do not count every time I do a row, and I don't count how many rows I do. I just make sure I always skip the first stitch and go into the last stitch. And we just go back and forth left to right. So starting the next row, I'm going to skip this stitch. This is our first stitch. We skip it. It's going to hang out to the side. And you can notice it just looks a little bit different, but the edge of our blanket, it's going to look really nice. Reach in, pull up. And now you can start to see your chunky knit blanket forming. All right, we're going to keep going back and forth. I'm going to show you the end of this row, the start of the next. So, last stitch. Oh no, not yet. Got one more. There's our last stitch there. Don't forget that last stitch. Go into that. Now starting our next row this way. I'm going to skip that first stitch, go into the second. All right, guys. I will see you when we're ready to switch to the next skein of yarn. All right, everyone. I'm getting to the end of my first skein. This is what our blanket's looking like so far. I purposely made this one loose to give you guys an idea of the difference between the tighter knit over here and the looser. So it's turning out really nice, but here we are. I'm just going to pull up a little till I get closer to the end of the tail. So I'm just reaching in, pulling up. Like I said, I'm making this one looser. You can see the gaps and the holes in this. That's the look I was going for with this baby blanket. The smaller you make these loops when you pull through, the tighter your blanket's gonna look and the less gaps and holes you're gonna see. All right, I'm at the end of this row, but I'm gonna go ahead and tie onto my next skein now. So here's the end of the first thing. So you are halfway through your baby blanket. I'm gonna take the label off and find the end. There it is. All right, keeping it really basic and simple, all I'm gonna do is tie these two together. So putting them together like this, I'm gonna make a loop and pull both of those yarn tails through the loop. And here's the key, just make sure it's really, really tight. So give it a tug on both sides, making sure it's not gonna come out. And then you cut your yarn tails. So cutting there and there. Get rid of those, get some of the fuzzies off. All right, and you're ready to keep going with your blanket. So I'm at the end of this row. I'm gonna make sure I don't skip this loop because this is at the end of my row. I'm gonna pick up this loop hanging out to the side, starting my next row in this direction. So get some of that loose. All right, I'm skipping the first one. It's gonna stay to the side there, pulling up the second loop. And you can see that that's where the knot went. But as this blanket gets made, you'll see that you can't even see where the knot is. It gets hidden in there really well. Oops. All right, this is my chunky knit baby blanket and how it looks so far. I'll see you guys when we are ready to finish. Right, coming up to the end of our blanket, look how good it looks. And you can see how much yarn I have left. Oh, some fell to the side, but let's just keep going. So when you are at towards the end of your skein, or you are liking the length of your blanket and you don't want to make it any longer, to do the finishing row, the very last row, you want to make sure that your yarn goes across your work at least 3 times. Actually, this might have to be my last row. Let's take a look. So this is my last row here. I'm going to show you guys. And when your blanket gets long, you might have to start folding it up while you work on it. So you just want to make sure this is how much yarn you need to have left. The yarn needs to go across your work 3 times. So measure out 1, 2, and 3. So when my yarn is measured out 3 times across my work, this is how much I have left. It might be enough for 1 row. It honestly might be cutting a little bit close. So I'm going to play on the safe side, and I'm going to go ahead and stop now. I won't cut the yarn yet, but I'm going to stop now and show you guys how to finish off. So I happen to be on the left side of my blanket, and to finish off, what I'm going to do is this first loop and the second loop. I'm going to put them together. Normally you skip the first loop on the beginning of each row. This is your finishing row. We are knitting 2 together for the entire row. So putting both loops on my fingers, grab my working yarn and pull up. Keep this loop on your fingers and get the next one. So 2 loops, pull through both of them. Keep this loop on your fingers, grab the next loop, and you will find, just a side note here, sometimes there will be knots in your yarn from where at the factory or wherever these are made, they had to tie together. So putting my 2 loops together, I'm pulling through both loops. Keep this loop on my fingers and get the next one and pull through. And you can see how as it finishes the blanket, it makes this really nice edge. All right, keep this on my fingers, grab the second loop here, pull through both loops, grab 2 loops, pull through both, grab 2 loops, pull through. You can see how I'm getting to the end of that length of yarn. All right, 2 loops on my finger and pull through, keeping that on my finger and grabbing the next loop, pull through, and pull through. Oh, and I came across a problem here that I noticed. I know I showed this in my adult tutorials as well, but sometimes the loops do fall out. And you can see here that this kind of yarn hanging in the back here is just not right. It is actually supposed to go in this loop, but it just fell out. And that's all you do to fix it. You see it hanging there like that, and you're like, hey, that just doesn't look right, it looks different. You just reach through and pull that up like this. So, both loops on my finger, pull through. And again, 2 loops, pull through. My last loop hanging out to the side here. Keep this on your fingers, grab the last loop, pull through. All right, we did have a little bit yarn left to spare. I'm going to go ahead and cut this shorter. And I'll just cut about right there. So, the top edge of your blanket is complete. Now, when you get to here, you have this last loop left. To finish off, I like to do a technique, I know this is common in crochet, where you chain 1. So what I'm going to do here, keep my fingers in this loop. This is what's left of the working yarn. I'm going to pull through all the way. Then I'm going to hold the yarn and pull tight, and there is a knot right there. You can't see it, it really blends in well. And your blanket is done, so let's weave in the ends. All right, so the top of my blanket here that we just completed, what you're going to do is tie a knot in the yarn. So make a loop, pull it through, and pull tight. Cut the yarn tail. Tying a knot helps keep the yarn from unraveling. But even if this yarn came out of the blanket and it was always hanging out like that, this knot is pretty secure and should not come apart. This just makes the yarn or the blanket have a nice complete finished look. So I'm going to take this yarn tail and just weave it through some of these existing stitches here. Now, with this being a looser blanket, you don't have as many options of hiding it between some of these stitches because they are just loose and gappy and just really drapey. So I'm just going to go back and forth through this top finishing off part. And it looks like I can go through maybe one more. Oops. Like that. Get a little tug. And there we hid that yarn tail. So let's go to the beginning edge of our blanket. And right there, we already have a knot in this yarn from where we started. That is kind of a long tail. And I don't really want to weave through that many times, so I'm going to make my knot a little bit closer to the blanket and cut the extra tail. All right, my knot's right there. And then here's where that slip knot was. You can kind of stretch that out if you want to. I'm just going to weave this back and forth through that starting chain. Let's see, we'll do one more and pull tight. The knot will also kind of secure it in place. All right, so here's our blanket. Oh my goodness, it is just so soft. Let's see how it compares to a tighter knit blanket. Okay, we have our 2 completed blankets here. This is the one I made for this tutorial. I made it looser, lots of gaps. I made this I don't know how wide that would be. Here's the blanket I made earlier with a tighter knit stitch, so you can see the difference. If I hold it up here versus this one. Either way, amazing gifts, handmade blankets. Knitting looser is going to give you a little bit bigger of a blanket with this very floppy, drapey look. When you stretch it out, this is how it looks. Here is the tighter knit stitch side by side. So that just goes to show how making the same blanket with just a looser stitches can turn out totally different. But that's our blanket tutorial. I hope you guys make blankets, and if you do, please email me pictures of your finished blanket. It is emilyrobinsnest@gmail.com. Can't wait to see what you guys work on.